I'm going to give you 5 of my favourite mix tricks. Let's dig in. So every mixer has got mix tricks that they use, and the beauty of social media, and particularly stuff like YouTube, is that we can share those ideas with each other. Over the years I've come across loads of different mix tricks. Some of them I've found myself, and others I've found whilst trawling through hours and hours of YouTube content. So I thought I would share a few of them with you guys. Before we get into this, I want to share one piece of advice with you all that I wish I had before I figured out all these not so secret mix tricks, and that is when to use them. The trick is knowing when to use them and why to use them, rather than just autopiloting them on all the time, which I've done loads over the years if I'm honest. And the thing I've discovered is that sometimes you just don't need them, and your mixes can sound overmixed and actually just better without some of them. So as well as showing you some of these mix tricks, I'm going to give you some hints and tips on when you should use them and why you should use them, so that you don't make the same mistake I did and autopilot to have them on all the time. A lot of these tricks work really well in the genres I work in, which is predominantly rock and metal, but they might not work in other things like country or jazz. But they solve a lot of problems in my genres, and that's what they are. They're tools to solve problems. So if those problems don't exist, don't use them. There's an old saying, less is more. So before we get into it, I'm going to ask you to like, subscribe and comment. It's super useful for me, and believe it or not, like over 90% of my viewers are not subscribed. Get it sorted. And also, there's a link below to buy me a coffee. I like coffee. Do it. Alright, number 1, parallel compression on drums. So I've been using parallel compression on my drums for a long time. When I first tried it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. It was one of those kind of game changer moments that people talk about. The thing it does is it adds punch and it adds length, and that is super great when you're wanting massive sounding drums, which quite often I do. Drums are kind of my thing. You can dial them in subtly, which I tend to try and do, but also if you want really over the top drums, you can really push this hard and get some incredible results. You're going to set this up as a send and return rather than an insert. So you're going to create an aux track with your parallel compressor on it. You're going to feed your drums into that, and then you're going to blend it into taste. That makes it super flexible, and also you can process the sound of it. If you want your parallel to be a bit brighter, you can add an EQ after it. And the reason I use this is because I always have very dense mixes, lots and lots of layers of guitars, and this parallel compression thing really helps bring the drums out of the mix and helps make them super punchy. Let's have a look. So looking at our drums, we've got an aux track here, which is basically dealing with our parallel compressor. I've got the UAD distressor. I'm a big fan of the distressor for parallel. You can see I've got quite a high ratio, 6:1. My input's pretty high. My attack is quite fast, and I've got a bit of medium release. So let's have a wee listen and look to what's happening. So you'll notice there's quite a lot of gain reduction going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle off and on the parallel compressor for you. So let's start with it bypassed. And then with it in. So it's super subtle, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle it on and off without speaking so you can hear the difference. Starting with it off. And in the context of a mix now, because that is quite subtle, so let's start with it off in the mix. And now on. And again, toggling it on and off, starting with it off. And then let's now exaggerate it. I'm going to turn the return volume up quite high. definitely works when it's a bit more subtle. So again, with it off.
And
now on. So that's massive. Alright, I hope you found that as cool as I did. Next up, Devil Lock on my cymbals. So this one I actually found on my own when I was trying to get my cymbals to work in a mix much better. I was looking for something that had a way more energy, and I was aware that people sometimes saturate cymbals, and I decided to kind of take it a bit further. Soundtoys Devil Lock is an amazing plugin. It can do some incredible stuff and some crazy shit as well. It's based on the legendary Shure Level Lock, which was a kind of ultra aggressive limiter, which was originally designed for use in public address systems. And it's been used by a few producers over the years to get some pretty cool results. What it does for me is adds a massive amount of vibe to my overheads, and that is something I'm always looking for, but I am always going to use it sparingly. And when we get into this, you're going to notice that I'm using very, very little of the controls that are there, and my mix of the affected to unaffected is very low. So you're going to hear predominantly the unaffected cymbals with a little bit of Devil Lock kicked in. Again, Soundtoys stuff is super, super vibey, and I use them all the time. Let's have a look. So looking at our cymbal bus here, I've got Devil Lock on here, and I'm using it super, super subtly. So you'll notice the crush and the crunch, which are basically the distortion circuits, are set to 1, so super low. The release is set to fast. I've dialed in a touch of darkness, and I've got my mix set at only 2. Let's have a wee listen just without this in place. And now let's bring it in. And again, I'm going to toggle it on and off so you can hear the difference. Starting with it off. And again, you can really hear that those cymbals become massive, and that's just with a tiny amount of mix. So again, let's do the same thing in the context of the mix, starting with it off, and I'll toggle it on and off a few times. So yeah, those cymbals just, they come to life. I really love this trick. All right, next up, console saturation on guitars. Right, I'm going to freely admit I stole this. I stole this off a guy called Adam Nolly Getgood, who is an amazing producer and musician who's done a bunch of stuff like Periphery and loads more. This is definitely a product of me scouring YouTube for hours and hours on end. The idea is that you would route your guitar signal out of a console and back into a console mic pre, and that's going to give you extra saturation. And the reason you get so much saturation is that bringing a line level signal out of a console and feeding that back into a mic level creates a lot of distortion. And it's that distortion that we want to blend into our guitar signal to add a little bit of extra vibe. Now this can be done in the box using a plugin. We're going to use a Neve style plugin, and specifically one that allows us to adjust the input gain to mic level and introduces that harmonic distortion and the character of the Neve basically. Again, this should be done in a send and return, and one of the things you're definitely going to have to do is bring the output of that plugin down, because when you switch that to a mic level input, the level is going to go through the roof. So it's vital that you adjust that on the output, and we'll have a look at that in a second. The reason I tend to use this is because it gives my guitars extra bite and again a little bit of extra vibe. It kind of brings them a little bit more forward in the mix. It's kind of difficult to explain, but it's cool. So let's have a wee look.
Okay, so I've got a Neve style plugin here, and the really big important part of this is the mic pre-section here. This plugin allows me to adjust the level at mic level, and that introduces that harmonic distortion that we're talking about. Now, the thing that's really important here is that I've turned down the output by 20 dB, because without that, this signal would go through the roof, and that's obviously not what we're looking for. And that's the only thing I've done, is just adjusted the preamp gain so that I'm getting a lot of kind of harmonic saturation in that new style, and I'm blending it in on a send and return. So here's my return here. So let's listen to the guitars without it. And now with it. And again, on and off, so you can hear the difference, starting with it off. So the guitars really come forward in the mix. I think this sounds amazing. Let's listen to it in the context of the mix. And again, I'm going to start with it off and then bring it in. Now you're mine. Now you're mine. Now you're mine. So the guitars really come forward. Let me exaggerate it a bit. Now you're and again, it really sits nice being a bit lower in the mix. So again, toggling on and off. Now you're mine. Now you're mine. Now you're mine. So yeah, the guitars just come forward in the mix. They're super punchy, they're super aggressive, and it really suits a mix like this.
Alright, I hope you thought that was cool as well. Let's move on to the next one, which is SSL channel compression on guitars. So again, this is something that I stole off someone else. This is a technique that I found online from Joel Barisi. He is a legendary producer and mixer, and I love the work that he's done specifically with Tool. I'm a huge Tool fan, and the records that he's done for them sound incredible. It's a really, really simple idea. All we're going to be doing is basically using the compressor from an SSL channel strip on our guitars. However, we're going to use it in a very specific way that's maybe slightly different to the usual way. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the release super, super fast, and we're going to set the threshold super, super low. So low that it's reacting incredibly sensitively to the signal coming in. Then what we're going to do is we're going to dial in the ratio, and that's going to control how much compression is applied. So an ever so slightly different way of working, because as you know, what we would normally do is we would set a ratio and we would adjust the threshold to taste. We're going to do it the opposite way. We're just slamming the threshold as low as it can go, and we're adjusting the ratio to taste. Now what this is really, really good for is getting those guitars to kind of be a little bit more in your face. They kind of bring things a little bit forward, which I really, really love. Let's check it out.
Okay, so looking at my channel strip, I'm using the Brainworks, which is my go-to channel strip for SSL style stuff. I've got my threshold right down. I've got my release as fast as it can be. And essentially what I'm going to do is dial in the amount of compression that I want using this ratio control. Let's listen to it without it. And now with it. And again, on and off. Starting with it off. So the guitars very subtly come forwards and there's a bit more weight to them. I think it sounds great. And again, I can dial in how much or how little I want just using the ratio controls. How will we look? And again, as you go harder, you're going to have to use the volume output to kind of compensate, but you shouldn't be using this too hard. It's almost as if the guitars get closer to you. Let's listen in the mix, starting with it off. Now you're mine. So on its own, it's super subtle, but I think in the context of a mix, this sounds amazing. I love this trick.
All right, last on the list, it's slapback delay on guitars. So this is another one that I discovered on my own when I just couldn't get a guitar in a mix to sit right. I was looking for something, I didn't know what, and I was just trying different fucking things to see what stuck. Slapback delay on guitars is not new. It's been used a lot in things like rockabilly and old-fashioned rock and roll stuff, and it's got a very, very specific tone. We're not going to use it like that though. First and foremost, we're going to use this super, super sparingly. I don't actually want to hear the effect of the slapback. So what I'm going to do is set the mix control incredibly low, like only a few percent basically, and I don't want to hear any audible slapback delay. What this is going to do is it's going to add extra vibe and a little bit of extra width to my guitars. And actually I find this really useful if I'm mixing a record that only has one guitar player and I need it to be a little bit bigger. Let's have a wee look.
Okay, so I've got one of my favourite delays for this. It's the Sound Toys Echo Boy. I love Sound Toys stuff. I think they sound vibey as fuck. It's great. What I've done is I've chosen a preset, which is this tape echo thing here. I've tapped out the tempo to the song. The feedback is super, super low. It's as low as it can go. And just notice how little of the actual delay I'm mixing in. Let's listen to it without it. And with it. And of course on and off. And the thing I want you to try and listen to is the width and the energy of the guitars, okay? Notice when I turn off the playback, you don't get an awful lot of delay that you hear at the end. Now, if I use too much of this, it gets super, super messy. That's nonsense. But if I have it so subtle and with very little of the effect in, it really adds a lot. And again, in the context of a mix, starting with it off. Now you're mine. Now you're mine. Now you're mine. Again, super, super subtle, but I think this sounds fantastic. It adds so much energy, so much width. It's great.
Well, did you enjoy that? Talk to me about it in the comments below. I hope you did. This is just a small selection of some of the mix tricks I've got up my sleeve, and I'm more than happy to share them with you. And actually, if you want more, I've got loads. So talk to me below, tell me if you want more, and I'll do another video just like this. And remember, if you've not liked and subscribed, please do turn on notifications as well. Like, it's super useful for me. I really love doing YouTube stuff and I want to do more. And if any of these are a game changer for you and you go, wow, this is amazing, then you know what you could do is buy me a wee coffee. I love coffee. All right, guys, see you next week. Take care.